Welcome to the next lesson in our module on basic Java features for developing Android apps, which introduces you to the concept of variables and types. After completing this lesson, you will recognize the important role that variables play in computer programming. You will also learn the rules for Java identifiers that we use to give names to various entities in our programs. Moreover, you will understand the concept of a data type and why it is important for us to specify the types of values in our programs. And finally, you will know how to use the Java assignment statement to give a new value to a variable. As with the previous lesson, you can probably speed through this lesson if you have prior programming experience in a language similar to Java. To motivate this discussion, let's first answer the question of why do we need variables? Let's say we want to create a calculator app. It would be very easy to create an app that adds 2 plus 2. But users of a calculator app want to do more than just add 2 plus 2. They may also want to add 3 and 21. Or maybe they want to perform subtraction instead of addition, or multiplication, or division. Such an app is doing the same thing, performing a calculation between two numbers. But the numbers and the type of calculation may vary. Thus, our app needs things called variables to hold these things that may vary. Variables allow our program to store information such as numbers and letters. This information is stored in the computer's memory. We call the stored information the variable's value. And the key property of a variable is that it can be given different values while the program is running. Every variable has two key attributes, a name and a type. We'll consider these one at a time, starting with the name. In Java, an identifier is a name that we give to a variable. We also use identifiers to give names to other things we will see later, such as methods and classes. Java requires that identifiers be constructed from a sequence of characters containing only letters, digits, and the underscore character, and they cannot start with a digit. These restrictions mean that you cannot use characters that are allowed in naming files on your computers, such as the space character or a dot or a hyphen. And Java identifiers are case sensitive, and thus a lowercase stuff and a capitalized stuff and an uppercase stuff are all different identifiers. And Java allows you to create identifiers that contain as many characters as you want. But some identifiers have special meaning to the Java language. We call these reserved words, and thus you are not allowed to use them as identifiers in your program. We will make note of these reserved words as we encounter them as this class progresses. We as Java programmers follow some conventions as we create the names in our programs. These are just common conventions that are not hard and fast rules that the Java language enforces. The first convention is that names given to variables and methods will begin with a lowercase letter. If the name contains multiple words, we use capital letters to highlight the other words. We call this camel case, since there are humps in the middle of the identifier. The next convention is that the names given to classes begin with a capital letter. And finally, good style says that the names we use should be descriptive of what is being stored or performed. So again, a variable has a name and a type. Now that we know about names, let's move on to types. Recall that everything in a computer is represented by a sequence of ones and zeros, and thus we need to tell the computer how to interpret a given sequence of ones and zeros so that it knows that this sequence represents a number while this other sequence represents a word. So a type defines how to interpret a sequence of ones and zeros as data, and also defines what operations are valid for that data value. Java has several types that are called primitive types since they are built into the actual computer hardware. There are 4 types that can be used to hold whole numbers, or what we refer to as integer types. Most often we will simply use the type int. Then there are 2 types that can be used to hold floating point numbers, of which we will most often use the type double. There is 1 type for holding a single character, and that is the type char. You may hear people pronounce it as type char since it is short for character, but I've always pronounced it as the type char. And the last primitive type is Boolean, which can hold a single true-false value. Now, any type that is not primitive type will be an object type, and we will see those later. Here's a slide showing the different primitive types in Java and how many bytes are used to store them and what range of values they can represent. As you can see, the int type uses 4 bytes and can represent integer values from slightly lower than -2 billion to slightly higher than +2 billion. And here are some examples of values of these different types. Integer values will always be whole numbers, while floating point values will have fractional parts. Note that -22.0 is a floating point value, since the presence of the decimal point tells the compiler to represent this number as a floating point value rather than an integer value, and they have very different representations as a sequence of ones and zeros. Character values are always a single character and use a single quote mark around that character. And finally, Boolean values are either true or false. Now that we know about names and types, we can combine the two to declare variables. To declare a variable, you need to specify both the type and the name. The type appears first, and then you specify the name you want to give the variable. In this case, we are declaring that we want to have a variable named number of rings that will be of type int. Java requires that we declare a variable before we can use it, and it is important to remember to use descriptive names since we want other programmers to be able to read and understand our programs. More formally, the syntax to declare variables is to specify the type desired and then follow the type with a comma-separated list of identifiers that we want to have that type. And the list is terminated with a semicolon. Here are some examples from the circus. We see we have 2 variables, number of rings and attendance, whose purpose is fairly clear from their descriptive names. Since the number of rings in the circus and the number of people in attendance are whole numbers, we have declared these variables to be of type int. We also have variables to keep track of the diameter of the ring and the weight of the lion. Since those values may have fractional parts, we have declared them to be of type double. And finally, we have a variable to keep track of whether the lion has been fed or not, which might be very important information for the lion tamer. It is declared to be type Boolean, since it has a simple yes, no, or true-false value. We learned earlier that a variable must be declared before it can be used. There are 2 standard places where we declare variables. We either declare a variable just before it is used the first time, or we declare it at the beginning of the section of code that uses it. That is at the top of the section of code enclosed in curly braces. You will see plenty of examples as you go through the rest of this course. Now that we can declare variables, we want to give them values. To do that, we use an assignment statement. The assignment statement gives or assigns a new value to a variable. For those of you who are familiar with the novel The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy may understand why we are assigning the value 42 to the variable named answer. In this context, the equal sign is called the assignment operator, and it has a different meaning than the equal sign that we use in algebra. The syntax of the assignment statement places the variable on the left, followed by the assignment operator, and then finally an expression that produces the value you wish to assign to the variable. We will learn more about expressions in a moment. Note that the variable to be given a new value is always on the left of the assignment operator, and the expression is on the right. Some simple examples include assigning the value 4 to the variable num of stacks, or assigning the value of the character Q to the variable top card, or assigning the value 10 times the value of cards played to the variable score. Note that in evaluating the assignment statement, the expression on the right of the assignment operator is evaluated first to produce a value, and then that value is assigned to the variable on the left of the assignment operator. In this example, we first evaluate the expression on the right by getting the current value of cards in hand, which is the value 8, and then subtracting 1 from it. This new value 7 is then assigned to change the variable card in hands. This is an example that the equal sign does not mean mathematical equality, as this statement does not make any sense in mathematics. Once a variable has been given a value, it can be used in expressions and it can be given new different values. In this example, we see that the variable x is assigned the value 3, is then used in several expressions, and then is assigned a new value that it will hold until it is possibly changed again. This lesson gave you an overview of variables and types. Now that you have completed this lesson, You should recognize the important role of variables, as well as learn the rules you must follow when naming a variable. You should also understand what a data type is and know the primitive types that are built into the Java language. Finally, you should know how to use an assignment statement to give a new value to a variable.